So this is my attempt at flipping the third lecture in the Year 1 module Creativity and Computing. Today we're going to be looking at ICT and creativity, and I want to focus particularly on the creativity aspect here. We move on to look at animation, and of course the practical work for today's lecture is going to be getting started creating your own scripted animation in Scratch around the characters and the setting for the children's book that you've chosen. But let's talk a little more about creativity. I hope you've all had a chance to watch Ken Robinson's brilliant video about why do schools kill creativity, and perhaps have had a chance to blog in response to that question. Do you think schools do kill children's creativity? And if so, what is it about schooling that does that? You don't necessarily have to agree with the question. It's also worth teasing out what we mean by creativity, and Ken Robinson is quite clear about that in his more recent book, The Element. We have there this definition of creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. I think that's really important, the second part of that. It's very easy to associate creativity merely with originality, but actually you are making something rather than just being original. And the thing which you make should be something which is valued by others, or the very least valued by yourself. So as part of the creative process, there is that sense of refining and improving and making the thing that you are creating as good as it possibly can be. And that, of course, is something which I hope you'll experience through making your Scratch games and through all of the other aspects of the module, that it's not enough just to be original. It also has to be a piece of work which has high quality, and that process of refinement is a really important aspect of the creative process, and perhaps not one which we always acknowledge in school. Saying well done is fine, and of course and affirming, but saying that's great, how could you make it better? Or on occasion, I don't think that's really as good as you could possibly make. You can do better than that. Might actually be the right thing for the teacher to do. We, of course, are embedded well inside Pappert's constructionist territory here. This is his attempt at explaining, or one of his attempts at explaining what he means by constructionism. He builds, of course, on the Piagetian sense of constructivism of building knowledge structures, but adds to that by saying that this happens best when the learner is consciously engaged in constructing a public entity, what we might term an artifact, a knowledge artifact. In our context, of course, a digital knowledge artifact, something which comes to embody that child's, that person's understanding of the world around them. Making something for other people to see is a particularly powerful learning technique, and of course that takes us very much into this territory of creativity. So I hope you can see that the Robinson view of creativity and the Pappert view of learning through constructing things for others do work very much hand in hand. There's a lot of interest in this at the moment, this sort of resurgence of an interest in craft skills in the analogue domain, with people knitting and people baking and people gardening, and all of that is very much a focus on creativity. All of this interest in original live music is in that territory too, I would suggest. And of course blogging in primary schools is about children's creativity. Nesta, National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts, using this phrase digital makers, which is a lovely one, isn't it? And look at the words on the screen there, yeah? That we want to see young people, even children, I'm curious about the word even in there, supported to be more critical in their use of digital technologies, taught computational thinking, using digital tools, control systems, game-making software, creatively solve problems, make businesses, express themselves and influence others. These are very, very powerful techniques. And moving the children that you teach on from being everyday communicators, from being information gatherers, to being creative producers and perhaps digital pioneers is exactly what teaching in ICT is going to be about. Meeting children where they are, stuff they can do already, which is communicate, find things out, and move them on to somewhere that they perhaps wouldn't have got without your influence. So teaching itself ought to be a creative process. If you want the children in your class to become creative producers themselves, then surely they need to see you modelling that creativity. So one can think of teaching as an art. And what are the implications of that? Well, in part, it means being original. It means not just using the same ring binder full of lesson plans that somebody else has produced. You're not always going to produce something as the best possible lesson ever for a particular topic. But if it is original, if you're putting something of yourself into that, then the children really will appreciate that. And I think the job would be a much more rewarding one for you yourselves. This whole interest in open educational resources, particularly in higher education, is all well and good. But actually the act of creating a course, of writing a set of lectures, is far, far more exciting, empowering, than just delivering a set which somebody else had produced. So yeah, do be original and do try things which other people haven't used and done, and be creative in that sense of originality when it comes to your lesson plan. I think there's also a strong place for playfulness. We talked about this and the importance of play in learning last week, but this really does matter if you're going to identify with the children that you're teaching, putting yourself in their shoes and approaching your job, your work as a teacher, with a certain playful attitude, I think is part and parcel of a more artistic approach, a more creative perhaps approach to teaching, a willingness to experiment, to try things out, to see it as something which is essentially fun. Of course it is work, but it can also be play too. And also, of course, any approach to teaching as an artistic discipline would have to emphasise that bit in the Robinson definition of value, that actually excellence really does matter. And it's not, well, perhaps, no, it isn't good enough just to do something which will do. There should be a willingness to continually strive to do the best possible lesson, to teach the best possible way. That an artistic approach to teaching means a continual striving for excellence. So let me just summarise those again. So again, an artistic approach to teaching would value originality, would allow scope for a playful approach, and would also emphasise the pursuit of excellence. But you don't often, or we hear teaching described as an art less and less now, and more as a craft. And of course, the Secretary of State's approach to teacher training emphasises that craft aspect of the work of the teacher. The same is true of programming, and this is a theme which we'll return to elsewhere during the course of the parallels between teaching and computer programming. Richard Stallman here, one of the great heroes of open source software, describes programming more as a craft than an art. It is a kind of art, but not a fine art. It's not simply about making beautiful things, making lovely things. It is, beg pardon, it is about making things which are fundamentally useful. An artistic approach to teaching might allow you to be terribly self-indulgent. A craft one actually does place your customers, the pupils you're teaching, their needs, what they need, what they want from you, right at the forefront of your mind. You're producing things, lessons, learning, which is going to be useful for them rather than merely interesting or merely beautiful. So the utility of what you do has to be part and parcel of that. Again, Robinson has this in his definition of creativity, of value to others. I suspect that's not just because it's interesting, it's lovely, but also because it is useful. So there's a movement in software development called the software craftsmanship approach, or group. Over 900 signatories to the software craftsmanship manifesto, which starts with the principles of agile development, which you can Google, or wait until we get to somewhere around lecture number 10, when we will talk about that. It says you start with the things which are really good, working software, responding to change, the individuals and the interactions, and collaborating with your customers, but you move on from that Again, striving for excellence, making it as good as it possibly can be. The well-crafted software in which you can be proud as a craftsman, matters. And that actually the best software is stuff which steadily adds value for your customers, which makes things better for them too. And that we focus on not just individuals, but also work within a community. Think of the old medieval guilds as one approach to this in terms of software development, so that there's a community of software developers working together, supporting one another, training the younger members of that community. And also that what one's looking for is a partnership which is productive on both sides, that everybody benefits through the collaboration, through the process of working customers and developers working together. What does this mean in terms of teaching? Well, this is something I'm particularly interested in, and again, a theme which we return to later on in the course of what are the parallels here. So yeah, not only a lesson that works, but actually a well-crafted lesson. Wouldn't that be something which is well worth aiming for? You know? Yes, this is fine. How could I make this better? And of course you should, of course you should be interested in steadily adding value, of improving your pupils' learning outcomes day after day. I had interesting conversations when I was back in school about this, that my view is that a lesson in which children haven't actually learned something new is an opportunity wasted. The emphasis on reinforcement on so much of our timetables of just practicing skills which they already have. I can understand why it happens, but surely the opportunity to learn something new, to know or to be able to do something which you didn't know or couldn't do at the start of the lesson. Shouldn't we be aiming for that in every lesson, steadily adding value to our, well, not customers, to the children that we're working with? And again, the emphasis here on a community of professionals, and thankfully the teaching profession is seeing that. And, the new technology is helping there like never before. TES forums, Twitter feeds. So, by the way, if you've not got a Twitter account, do get one. Sign up for Twitter. I've got a list of people who it's well worth following for you on Twitter. And also look at the #UKEdChat tag Thursday evenings between 8 and 9 o'clock. Well worth taking part in those conversations. So yes, this emphasis on a community of professionals working together. And of course a productive partnership, that we learn so much from the children, from the people that we are teaching. And that continual reflection on the experience of the lesson is something which takes your skills further and further forward. Part of this software craftsmanship movement is this notion of the craft of software development as akin to a medieval guild. The process of being an apprentice within a guild is something which I think a lot of the software development or the software craftsmanship movement are recognising as important for new developers. And I think we're seeing this too in our own line of work. And Gove, the Secretary of State, does talk about learning to teach is like being an apprentice. There are interesting parallels there too. So Hoover and Osh and I, Apprenticeship Patterns, well worth reading. I'll put the link into Blogfolio for you. You can get a free copy of this text online. But their interpretation of software craftsmanship has a number of bullet points here. I won't go through these in detail. But which of these doesn't apply to teaching as craft? To the process of becoming a teacher. And adopting these sorts of attitudes, Hoover and Osh and I would argue, is exactly the right thing which somebody new to software development, somebody who's becoming a software developer, ought to do. And I think it's very hard to spot any of these which wouldn't also apply to you in your process of, if you wish, apprenticeship for teaching, or the process of becoming a teacher. I'll give you a moment to just... Actually, you can pause the video if you want to stop and think about those. But isn't that a helpful way to think about the craft of teaching? Isn't that a helpful way to think about the right attitudes to have as you're becoming teachers? Okay. So something of the parallel between becoming a software developer and becoming a teacher, between the craft of software development and the craft, if you'll allow it, of teaching, particularly teaching creatively, I would suggest. I want to move on now to look at something a little more practical, which is the place of animation in school. Way back, before we validated the new degree programme for you, this was half of the first year ICT course. So there was you would produce a stop motion animation, and it's worth looking at some of those more creative skills. We'll return to a lot of the creative dimension of the subject after Christmas, whereas this term we're focusing very much, of course, on programming, which itself is a creative process. He strives to add. There are essentially two approaches to doing animation, particularly when you're working in school. And the most common of these, still I would suggest, is this notion of stop motion. This is what Nick Park does with Wallace and Gromit, that you take one photograph, move the models on. You're working with plasticine, or you're working in two-dimensional materials such as paper. So you set the thing up, take a photograph of it, move things ever so slightly, take another photograph, move things ever so slightly, take another photograph. And after a little while, you've got a whole collection of photographs there of a scene which has moved on from how it started. You run those photographs together very, very quickly. If you're looking at sort of 0.05 of a second, 20 frames a second, would create the illusion of movement, and then you have a cartoon that you've made. And children can produce some really very high quality work with that. Let me show you one of the ones which won the Bechter Schools Animation competition. Here we go.
After the Last Supper, Jesus went out with his disciples. Jesus and Peter were best friends. Hello, Peter. I won't be with you much longer, and you can't come with me. Lord, of course I can. I will follow you everywhere. I would die for you. Peter, I tell you the truth. Before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times. Even if I have to die, I'll never disown you. Suddenly, soldiers arrive to arrest Jesus. You, Jesus, are coming with us. Peter gets his sword out to protect him.
Well, I wonder how the story is going to end. I'm not going to show you the whole of that now. I'll try and upload that to Blogfolio, so you can have a look at that if you'd like to. As I say, one of the winners of the last Bechter Schools Animation competition. Hugely painstaking process. It will take up much of a half term. My worry about stop motion is that once children figure out how to do it, they write their story, they create their characters, they figure out how stop motion works, there's a whole lot of just sort of keeping children busy, if you'll allow me to put it like that, as they move things on, take a photograph, move things on, take a photograph. There's a lot of labour involved in this, and the creativity. Yes, there's loads at the start as they're planning the story and creating the characters. And there's a bit at the end as they're putting that together, although that's actually a fairly automatic process. But in the middle there's an awful lot of sort of just, taking photographs and moving things ever so slightly. Attention to detail, yes, and a very, very high quality product achievable at the end. But there is that balance. How much are they actually learning during those lessons when they're just moving things and taking photographs? Something for you to think about. Possibly a controversial view. Of more interest to us from the programming perspective is this notion of the scripted animation, that rather than doing everything by hand, what we produce is a set of instructions for the computer to follow, which produces the cartoon. So you can write the script for each character, you can write the script for props, you can even write the script, of course, to change the background, using a toolkit like Scratch. It's interesting here that these are the winners of Manchester University's UK Schools computer animation competition, which is limited only to scripted animation submissions, and I think a lot of these appear to be working in Scratch. I'll attempt to show you one of these now, but this is moderately problematic. There we go, let's try that one. That's looking better. Okay, so not on the whole as likely to produce a high quality product as the stop motion approach, but children learning much more through the process of that, and you can bring in a whole host of computer programming skills through creating a scripted animation. It's a great way into Scratch. Don't rush ahead to creating games in Scratch and miss out on all of the opportunities for creating animations in Scratch. There's some lovely examples on the Scratch community website at scratch.mit.edu as well. So what tools can you use for making animation in school? Well, something as simple as Microsoft Movie Maker is great for this. If you're working in stop motion, then here's a huge collection of photographs, throw them into Movie Maker, set them onto the timeline with very, very small durations, and run those together as a movie. It works fine, it really does. And something more sophisticated like Adobe Premiere Elements will allow you to do more clever effects in there, I'm sure. You can even use PowerPoint for this. Okay, we get criticised for teaching PowerPoint year in, year out in school, but actually you can set up PowerPoint as an automated slideshow, and you can bring the duration of one slide down very, very short, so you can use that as a tool for stop motion animation. There are also, of course, lots of really good toolkits for developing stop motion animation. I'm thinking of I Can Animate. There are others out there. If you know what you're doing, if you can program in Flash, then Flash is a tool which many have used, or some have used in a primary school context. I think the learning curve is really very steep there. I think there are better tools available, but if you've already got some Scratch experience or are interested in if you've already got some Flash experience or are interested in learning Flash, then certainly top end of Key Stage 2, it is inside their capabilities, and until really quite recently that was seen as a jolly useful tool for children to have. What else is there? HTML5, the new approach to designing web pages, the new standard for web pages, allows some animation in there within its Canvas toolkit. But again, that's not going to be any easier than programming in Flash, I'd suggest. Perhaps more versatile now, though. There's some lovely tools out there. There's a thing called Pivot Stick Figure, which I'll put into Blogfolio if you'd like to play with that. It's only available for Windows, but here's an example of something produced in Pivot Stick Figure. There we go. You get the idea. It's lovely work though, isn't it? Extra Normal is worth looking at as well. This has it's a sign-up service. You can log into this. There's a free account which will allow you to do the basics. This is the easiest way into producing a scripted animation, I'm sure. They have an education plan, but it's, I think, $10 per teacher plus 50 cents per pupil per month, which will mount up, but then again, if it's coming out of the school budget rather than your own money. As I say, there is an account which you can sign in for free to try it out and see what you think to this. Let's have a look at this.
To make an animated movie, you used to need lots of people and fancy software. Now, all that's needed is you and a keyboard. That's because with Extra Normal, if you can type, you can make movies. Making a movie on extranormal.com is easy. Choose a background and actors, then type what you want them to say, or even record your own voice. Come on, don't be shy. It's that simple. When you're done, post it on the Extra Normal website, send it to friends, or share it on Facebook, YouTube, and your blog. When making movies is this easy, the possibilities are endless. Millions of people have used Extra Normal to have fun, flirt, educate, inform, advertise, argue, and more. Make movies for a just cause or just because. Get things done or have some fun. It's a way to go viral in style. Be creative. Be you. That's extra normal.
And it's an incredibly simple toolkit to use, so I'd really encourage you to explore that, to play with that, to see what you can do with extra normal. It's a very easy way into this, and an alternative there to Scratch, certainly. It's worth saying that computer-generated animation goes a long way these days. All of Pixar's work, Finding Nemo, for example, and that's an example which you'll return to shortly, I think, is generated on computers, and so that's going to be a combination of really creative, talented artists working to design characters together with computer programmers putting the story ideas into action as they create the animation there. So yes, some really powerful software running behind the scenes there, but it's actually the sort of thing which you can do, writing an animation using Scratch as your scripting language, to what Pixar's animators are doing with something like Finding Nemo. It's they're both on that same journey. Okay, what else do we need to say? I think that's probably it from me. During the lecture, what I want you to do is to have a go at creating your own scripted animation. There are some resources which you can use to get you started with that. I've recorded a very short walkthrough, which I'm not going to add on now, of how to get started with Scratch. This actually goes further than the animation idea, because there's a bit of interactivity coming in at the end, so I'd very much encourage you to watch that if you want me explaining this. And Amanda Wilson and Zoe Ross have put together a sequence of 9 tutorials, so much more sort of bite-size approach to this for Vital, and I'll put the links to that up on Blogfolio. But yeah, work with your partner, create your cartoon or your scripted animation, I suppose, to use that language, which uses the characters and the setting from the book that you're going to be working on. So you need to spend some time on designing those characters, designing those backgrounds, but try and get beyond that to actually start telling something of a story, like the cutscene inside a video game. Okay, I think I'll stop the recording there. Do please post into the Blogfolio page questions. I'd like a question from each of you about what you've just seen. Thank you very much.